Silas Blackwood was known as a heartless war machine, ruthless to the bone. I believed it right until my lungs froze, and the snow buried me alive in the backyard. I was just the invisible maid discarded while the pack feasted inside. But when Silas found me dying in the drift, the sound he made wasn't human. It was the terrifying sound of a king declaring total war on his own people. This is the dramatic story of how the Alpha found his maid freezing during the winter feast, and how his fury burned the world down to save me. The grandiose chandeliers of the Blackwood Manor didn't reach the scullery. Down here, the air smelled of stale dishwater, frantic sweat, and the overpowering iron-rich scent of raw venison being prepped for the winter feast. Ivy O'Connell scrubbed the copper pot until her knuckles turned white, then red, and finally a bruised purple. The water was scalding, but she didn't dare complain. In the Blackwood pack, if you weren't a warrior or a high-ranking socialite, you were furniture. And Ivy was less than furniture. She was the dust underneath it. "Faster, O'Connell," Mrs. Halloway barked, her voice like grinding gravel. The head housekeeper loomed over the sink, her grey bun pulled so tight it pulled her eyelids back. "The Alpha has requested the vintage Pinot for the high table. If those crystal flutes aren't polished to a mirror shine in 5 minutes, you'll be sleeping in the kennels." "Yes, Mrs. Halloway." Ivy whispered, her voice raspy. She hadn't had a drink of water in 6 hours. Above them, the muffled thumping of bass and the clinking of glasses signaled that the winter feast was in full swing. It was the most important night of the year. Wolf packs from 3 neighboring territories had gathered to solidify alliances. The wealth on display upstairs was staggering women in silk gowns that cost more than Ivy's life, men in tailored suits discussing territory lines and blood feuds. Ivy dried her hands on her apron, her fingers trembling. She was 21, an Omega by birth, but an orphan by circumstance. Her parents had died in a border skirmish when she was 3, leaving her with no status, no money, and no protection. She had been absorbed into the Blackwood estate as a ward, which was a polite way of saying slave. "Take this up." Halloway shoved a silver tray into Ivy's chest. It was heavy laden with 12 delicate crystal flutes. "Do not make eye contact. Do not speak. Serve the Alpha's table and get back down here. If you are seen, you will regret it." Ivy nodded, taking the weight. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she pushed through the service doors, navigating the labyrinth of hallways that led to the grand ballroom. The noise hit her first, a roar of laughter, chatter, and clinking silverware. Then the smell. Expensive perfume, roasting meat, and the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of shifters. The pheromones in the air were thick enough to taste. She kept her head down, moving like a ghost along the perimeter of the room. She was invisible. She had perfected the art of being nowhere and everywhere. She reached the high table. Silas Blackwood sat at the center. Even with her eyes lowered, she could feel him. He radiated a power that made the hair on her arms stand up. He was terrifyingly still while everyone around him moved. He didn't laugh. He didn't eat. He just watched his dark eyes, scanning the room with the predatory boredom of a lion surrounded by sheep. Ivy moved to place a glass near the Beta Kalen. "Oops." The voice was sickly sweet. Beatrice Vane, the daughter of the Delta, and the woman everyone assumed would eventually warm Silas's bed. Beatrice's elbow shot out, quick as a viper catching the edge of Ivy's silver tray. It happened in slow motion. The balance shifted. Ivy gasped, trying to overcorrect, but her exhausted muscles failed her. Crash! 3 crystal flutes shattered against the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the crowded room. The music didn't stop, but the conversation at the high table died instantly. Red wine, the Alpha's vintage Pinot, splashed across the hem of Beatrice's pristine white gown. "You clumsy little rat!" Beatrice shrieked, jumping up and drawing every eye in the room to them. "Look what you did! This is Italian silk!" Ivy dropped to her knees, her hands shaking violently as she reached for the shards of glass. I'm so sorry, my lady. I slipped. I'll clean it." "Get away from me," Beatrice kicked out. Her stiletto heel caught Ivy in the shoulder, sending her sprawling backward into the puddle of wine and glass. A shard sliced Ivy's palm, bright red blood mixed with the dark wine. The room went silent. The smell of fresh blood, even a drop, triggered instincts. "Mrs. Halloway!" Beatrice screamed. The housekeeper materialized from the shadows, her face a mask of pure fury. She grabbed Ivy by the back of her uniform, hauling her up like a rag doll. "I told you!" Halloway hissed into Ivy's ear, her voice trembling with the fear of embarrassing the Alpha. "I told you not to be seen." Ivy looked up, panic seizing her chest. Her eyes darted to the center of the table. Silas Blackwood was looking at her. For a second, just one heartbeat, their eyes locked. His were the color of storm clouds, dark and unreadable. He didn't look angry. He looked focused. He tilted his head slightly, his nostrils flaring. But before he could speak, Beatrice stepped in front of him, blocking his view. "Silas, darling, look at this mess. She's ruined the mood." Mrs. Halloway dragged Ivy back towards the kitchen doors. "I will handle this Alpha Blackwood. My deepest apologies." They burst through the service doors, the noise of the party cutting off instantly. Halloway didn't stop at the sink. She dragged Ivy past the scullery, past the pantry to the heavy oak door that led to the back loading dock. "Mrs. Halloway, please," Ivy begged, clutching her bleeding hand. "I'll work a double shift. I'll pay for the dress. Please." "You have embarrassed this pack for the last time," Halloway snarled. She threw the bolt and kicked the door open. The winter wind howled in carrying snow that bit like needles. It was a blizzard out there, 10 degrees below zero. "Cool off, Ivy. Maybe the cold will teach you the grace you lack." "Wait, my coat!" Ivy cried out. She was wearing a thin, short-sleeved maid's uniform. No cloak, no scarf, no boots, just thin flats. "I'll die out there." "Then die quietly," Halloway said. She shoved Ivy out into the snow. The heavy door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Ivy pounded on the wood. "Mrs. Halloway! Please, it's freezing!" Silence. She stood alone on the loading dock, the wind instantly cutting through her thin cotton dress. The snow was already ankle-deep and rising. She looked around desperately. The servants' quarters were a mile down the road. She would never make it. She curled into a ball against the door, trying to preserve heat, shivering so hard her teeth clacked together. The music from the party vibrated through the wall against her back. Warmth, food, and life were just 6 inches away. But she was on the outside. As the numbness started to creep into her fingers and toes, Ivy O'Connell looked up at the black sky and realized the truth. Nobody was coming. Silas Blackwood was bored out of his mind. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, ignoring the delta from the River Rock pack, who was currently bragging about his territory's elk population. Silas didn't care about elk. He didn't care about politics. And he certainly didn't care about Beatrice Vane's ruined dress. But he couldn't stop thinking about the girl. The Omega. The one with the terrified eyes. When she had fallen, when the glass had sliced her hand, a scent had hit Silas so hard it nearly knocked the wind out of him. It wasn't just the metallic tang of blood. Underneath the scent of fear and cheap soap, there was something else. Something wild. Like vanilla beans crushed in fresh snow. Like ozone before a lightning strike. It was faint, buried under years of exhaustion and suppression. But it was there. Silas, are you listening? Beatrice touched his arm, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. Silas pulled his arm away. I need air. But the speeches are about to start, Beatrice whined. My father is going to toast to our future alliance. Silas stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. Enjoy the speech, Beatrice. He walked away, ignoring the hushed whispers that followed him. He needed to clear his head. His wolf, a massive midnight black beast, usually dormant during these frivolous parties, was pacing in the back of his mind. Restless, agitated. Find her? The wolf grumbled. It's just an Omega, Silas argued with himself. She spilled wine. Holloway dealt with it. Find her. The command slammed into his skull, making him stumble. Silas gripped the doorframe of the balcony. What the hell was wrong with him? He hadn't felt this instability since his first shift. He pushed the glass doors open and stepped onto the main terrace. The cold air should have been soothing. Werewolves ran hot. The winter was their element. But tonight, the wind felt wrong. It felt cruel. He took a deep breath, intending to fill his lungs with the crisp mountain air. Instead, he choked on the scent of distress. It was fading, but it was there. The vanilla scent. It was souring with something dangerous. Hypothermia. Silas vaulted over the stone railing of the terrace, landing silently in the snow 10 feet below. He ignored the main path and followed his nose. He rounded the corner of the manor, moving past the meticulously trimmed hedges toward the back of the house, toward the service entrance. The snow was coming down harder now, a whiteout. Visibility was near zero. But he didn't need to see. He could hear it. A heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Too slow. Way too slow. Silas broke into a run. He rounded the corner to the loading dock and stopped dead. There, curled into a tight ball against the service door, was a mound of white. If he hadn't been looking for it, he would have thought it was just a snowdrift. But a tuft of brown hair poked out from the ice. No, Silas breathed. He fell to his knees, his expensive suit soaking into the slush. He frantically dug through the snow, brushing it away, to reveal her. She was blue. Her skin, usually pale, was now the color of a bruise. Her lips were cracked and violet. Ice crystals had formed on her eyelashes, sealing her eyes shut. She wasn't shivering anymore. That was the worst sign. When the shivering stops, the body is giving up. Wake up, Silas commanded, his voice shaking. He grabbed her shoulders. She was stiff. Girl, wake up. He pulled her into his lap, ripping off his suit jacket and wrapping it around her, though he knew it wasn't enough. He placed his hand over her heart. It was beating, but barely. A flutter like a dying bird, and then skin on skin. As his hand touched her neck to check her pulse, the spark jumped. It wasn't a spark, it was a lightning bolt. It tore through Silas, starting at his fingertips and searing straight into his soul. His vision went white. His wolf threw its head back and howled in the depths of his mind, a sound of pure, possessive ecstasy. Mate. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. This wasn't just a maid. This wasn't just a clumsy girl. This was the other half of his soul. The one thing he had spent 30 years believing he would never find. The moon goddess had gifted him a mate, and his pack, his people had left her outside to freeze to death like garbage. The shock vanished, replaced instantly by a rage so hot it melted the snow around his knees. Silas roared. It was a sound that shattered the windows of the service quarters. A true alpha roar. It carried the weight of impending death for anyone who had touched her. He scooped her up in his arms. She was terrifyingly light. "I've got you," he growled, pulling her freezing body against his burning chest. "I've got you, little one, and I am going to kill them all." He didn't go back to the service door. He walked around the building carrying his dying mate and kicked the double doors of the grand ballroom open with enough force to crack the wood. The music stopped. The chatter died. 300 guests turned to look. There stood Silas Blackwood, covered in snow, his eyes glowing a lethal bioluminescent gold. In his arms he held the limp, frozen body of the serving girl. "Who?" Silas said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated the wine in the glasses put her outside. Silence stretched heavy and suffocating. "I said." Silas stepped forward, and the floorboards groaned under the pressure of his aura. "Who?" The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear the crackle of the fireplace, a sound that seemed mocking now, considering the girl freezing in the alpha's arms. Mrs. Halloway, standing near the buffet table checking the silverware, went pale. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a wax figure. She dropped a silver spoon. Clang. Silas's head snapped toward the sound. His golden eyes locked onto the housekeeper. "You," he growled. "Alpha, I—" Halloway stammered, stepping back. She was clumsy. She broke the crystal. It was discipline. Discipline. Silas repeated the word like it was a foreign language. He looked down at Ivy's blue face. He could feel her life force slipping. He didn't have time for this. Not yet. "Kalen," Silas barked. His beta was at his side in a second. "Alpha. Clear the room. Lock the gates. No one leaves this estate. Not a single soul." Silas's voice dropped to a whisper that carried more threat than a shout. "Grab Halloway. Put her in the cells. If she speaks, gag her. If she fights, break her legs." "Consider it done," Kalen said, his face grim. He had seen the way Silas was holding the girl. He knew what it meant. Silas didn't wait. He turned and stormed out of the ballroom, carrying Ivy toward the grand staircase. He ignored the gasps, the whispers of the visiting dignitaries, and the shocked expression on Beatrice Vane's face. He took the stairs 3 at a time, heading straight for the Alpha's wing. He kicked his bedroom door open and laid Ivy gently on the massive bed, a bed no one had ever shared with him. "Get Dr. Harris," he shouted into the hallway. "Now!" He turned back to Ivy. She wasn't warming up. The contrast between his expensive black silk sheets and her grey, lifeless skin was sickening. Come on," Silas muttered. He stripped off his wet shirt, his skin radiating the intense heat typical of an alpha. He climbed into the bed, pulling her stiff body against his bare chest trying to transfer his thermal energy to her. He wrapped his limbs around her, cocooning her. He purred a deep, rumbling chest sound that wolves use to heal and comfort packmates. "Don't you dare die on me," he thought, projecting the thought into her mind. "I just found you. You are not allowed to leave." Minutes passed. They felt like hours. Dr. Aris, an elderly wolf with kind eyes, burst in with a medical bag. "Hypothermia," Aris said immediately, seeing the girl. He didn't ask questions. He moved to the bedside, injecting a syringe of adrenaline and shifter-healing serum directly into Ivy's heart. "Her core temp is critical, Silas. Keep holding her. Your body heat is the only thing saving her right now." "Is she going to make it?" Silas asked, his voice cracking. The invincible alpha sounded like a scared child. "The serum is working. Her heart rate is stabilizing." Aris checked the monitors he had quickly attached. "But the damage." "Silas, look at her hands." Silas looked. He had been so focused on her face he hadn't looked at her hands. They were raw, not just from the cold. They were covered in old scars, burn marks, and calluses that no 20-year-old girl should have. There were faint, silvery lines around her wrists. "Ligature marks," Aris noted quietly. "Old ones. She's been tied up before. Recently." Silas felt a growl building in his chest, so deep it rattled his ribs. "She's a maid. She works in my house, under my roof. Whoever has been disciplining her has been doing it for a long time," Aris said, packing his bag. "She's malnourished, Silas. She weighs nothing. This isn't just one night in the snow. This is years of neglect." Silas closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against Ivy's icy temple. He was the alpha. He was supposed to be all-knowing, all-seeing. He protected his borders. He protected his economy. But right here, in his own kitchen, his mate had been tortured under his nose. "She wakes up," Silas whispered, "and then heads will roll." It took 3 hours. The first sign was a twitch in her fingers, then a soft, pained whimper. Silas pulled back slightly, brushing a damp strand of hair off her forehead. "Ivy." He knew her name now. Kaelin had texted him her file while he waited. Ivy O'Connell, ward of the state. Parents deceased. Ivy's eyelashes fluttered. She opened her eyes. They were green, not a dull hazel, but a striking emerald green that seemed to glow in the dim light of the bedroom. She blinked, confused. She saw the silk canopy above her. She felt the softness of the mattress. She felt the intense burning heat of the man holding her. She turned her head and saw him. The monster. The alpha. Ivy screamed. She didn't just scream. She scrambled backward, fighting the blankets falling off the other side of the bed in a tangle of sheets. She hit the floor and immediately curled into a ball, covering her head with her hands. "Please," she sobbed, her voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Don't put me back outside. Please, Alpha. I'm sorry." Silas froze. His heart shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. She wasn't looking at him with love. She wasn't looking at him with the mate recognition. She was looking at him with pure, unadulterated terror. He slowly moved to the edge of the bed, keeping his hands up, palms open. "Ivy. Ivy, look at me. You aren't in trouble," Mrs. Halloway said. She gasped, hyperventilating. "She said if I embarrassed you, Mrs. Halloway is in a cell," Silas said, his voice hard as steel, then softening instantly as he looked at her. Ivy, nobody is going to hurt you ever again. Do you understand? I am the Alpha, and I am telling you that you are safe." Ivy peeked out from behind her arms. She looked at the fireplace, roaring with warmth. She looked at Silas, shirtless, powerful, but looking at her with an expression she had never seen on a man's face before. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you save me?" Silas slid off the bed, kneeling on the floor, so he was lower than her. He wanted to minimize his size. He reached out his hand, hovering near hers, waiting for permission. "Because," Silas said, his golden eyes burning into hers, "you are my mate." Ivy stared at him. The words hung in the air. "No." She shook her head, tears spilling over. "I can't be. I'm nobody. I'm the help. I'm the—" Beatrice said. "Beatrice is a loller," Silas growled softly. He closed the distance, his fingers brushing her knuckles. "And you are not nobody. You are the Luna of the Blackwood Pack." The door to the bedroom opened. Kaelin stepped in, looking agitated. "Alpha, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem." Silas didn't look away from Ivy. "What?" "It's the council. Beatrice Vane's father is demanding you release Halloway. He says—" Kaelin hesitated. "He says you can't punish a high-ranking staff member for disciplining a useless rogue." Silas stood up. The tenderness vanished, replaced by the warlord. "Watch her," Silas said to Kaelin. He turned to the door. "Where are you going?" Ivy asked, her voice trembling. Silas paused at the door, looking back over his shoulder. "I'm going to go downstairs," Silas said calmly. "And I'm going to remind them why they call me the Butcher of the Blackwoods." The grand ballroom, usually a place of music and celebration, had transformed into a courtroom. But there was no judge, and there was no jury. There was only the executioner. Lord Orion Vane, the Delta of the Pack, and father to Beatrice, paced in front of the fireplace. He was a large man, thick-necked and red-faced, accustomed to getting his way through bluster and lineage. "This is absurd," Orion shouted, gesturing to the silent crowd of dignitaries. My daughter was humiliated by a clumsy servant, and Silas locks the doors. He detains Mrs. Halloway, a woman who has served this house for 30 years. For what? Doing her job. Beatrice sat on a velvet sofa nearby, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. "He looked at me like I was a monster, Daddy, and he carried that filth up to his bed." "It's a power play," a visiting alpha from the west muttered. "Blackwood is unstable. He's chosen a servant over his delta. It's a sign of weakness." "Weakness!" The word came from the top of the stairs. It wasn't shouted yet. It silenced the room instantly. Silas Blackwood descended to the marble staircase. He had put on a fresh shirt, black and crisp, but he hadn't buttoned the cuffs. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and veins that pulsed with adrenaline. He moved with a fluid, lethal grace, his footsteps making no sound on the stone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Orion," Silas said, reaching the bottom floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, leaving a wide aisle between the Alpha and his Delta. "You were speaking of weakness. Please, continue." Orion Vane puffed out his chest, though his eyes darted nervously to Silas's hands. "Silas, we are all concerned. You abandoned the winter feast to coddle a maid who ruined an expensive gown. You've imprisoned the head housekeeper. The council demands an explanation." "The council demands—" Silas tilted his head. He took a slow step forward. The council exists at my pleasure, Orion. Do not mistake my patience for democracy. She is just a maid, Beatrice shrieked, unable to help herself. She's a nobody. A clumsy, stupid... Beatrice, Silas said softly. He didn't look at her. If you speak one more word, I will have your tongue cut out. Beatrice's mouth snapped shut with an audible click. The shock in the room was palpable. Alphas were stern, yes, but to threaten a high-ranking female publicly it was unheard of. Silas stopped 3 feet from Orion. He towered over the older man. "You want to know why Holloway is in a cell?" Silas asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Because an hour ago I found a member of this pack freezing to death in the snow, locked out, intentionally." "It was discipline," Orion argued, sweating now. "The girl is an Omega. She broke protocol. Holloway was teaching her a lesson." "A lesson," Silas repeated. "Tell me, Orion, when you discipline your dogs, do you starve them until their ribs show? Do you burn them with cigarettes?" Orion blinked. "What I don't know what you're—" "I saw the marks." Silas's voice dropped, becoming a growl that vibrated in the chests of everyone present. "I saw the scars on her back, the burns on her arms. Someone has been torturing her for years, under my roof." "She's an orphan," Orion scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "Omegas are prone to accidents. They are fragile. Look, Silas, we can pay for a doctor, but to ruin the feast over a servant." Silas closed his eyes for a brief second, his wolf clawing at the inside of his skull, demanding blood. "She is not a servant." Silas opened his eyes. They were glowing a bright, incandescent gold, the sign of the wolf emerging. "She," Silas said, enunciating every syllable, "is my mate." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Beatrice gasped, a sound like a dying balloon. Orion's face went from red to chalk white. The visiting dignitaries exchanged horrified looks. The Alpha had found his mate, and the pack had been abusing her. "No," Beatrice whispered. That's impossible. She's a rat. She's nothing. She is the Luna of the Blackwood pack." Silas roared, the sound shaking the chandeliers. "And you left her in the snow to die." Silas moved faster than the eye could follow. 1 second he was standing still. The next he had his hand wrapped around Orion Vane's throat. He lifted the Delta, a 200-pound man, off the ground, with one hand slamming him into the stone pillar behind him. Crack! Orion gagged his feet, dangling 6 inches off the floor, clawing uselessly at Silas's iron grip. "Who knew?" Silas snarled into Orion's face. "Holloway didn't act alone. Who knew she was being abused? Did you know, Orion? Did you see the bruises and look away?" "Silas, please." Orion wheezed, his face turning purple. "Tell me." Silas tightened his grip. "Everyone!" Beatrice screamed from the sofa, terrified that her father was about to die. "Everyone knew, okay? Everyone knew." Silas froze. He didn't drop Orion. He turned his head slowly to look at Beatrice. "Everyone," Silas whispered. She's the pack, runt." Beatrice stammered, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Holloway said she was working off her parents' debt. We just... Nobody cared, Silas. She's just Ivy. She scrubs the floors." Silas dropped Orion. The Delta crumbled to the floor, gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat. Silas looked around the room. He looked at the faces of his council, his warriors, his friends. They all looked down. They knew. They had seen the girl with the bruised arms pouring their wine. They had seen her limping. They had seen her thin frame. And they had done nothing because she was an omega. Because she didn't matter. A cold, dark realization washed over Silas. He wasn't the ruler of a noble pack. He was the king of a rot. "Get out," Silas said. His voice was hollow. "Silas, we can discuss." A brave council member started. "Get out!" Silas screamed, the force of it shattering a window pane across the room. "Every single one of you who isn't family or sworn guard, leave my house. If you are on my land by sunrise, I will hunt you down." The room erupted into chaos. Dignitaries scrambled for their coats. Beatrice grabbed her father, dragging him toward the door. "And Orion," Silas called out. The Delta froze near the exit. "You are stripped of your rank," Silas said coldly. "You are no longer Delta. You are lucky I don't strip the skin from your back. If I see you or your daughter near Ivy again, I will not be so merciful." As the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind the fleeing guests, the butcher of the Blackwoods stood alone in the center of the ruined feast. He had destroyed his political alliances in 5 minutes. He had humiliated his strongest supporters, and he didn't care. He turned to Kaelin, who was standing by the stairs, looking solemn but proud. "Kaelin," Silas said, his voice exhausted. "Bring me the ledger, the household accounts, everything regarding Ivy O'Connell's employment." "You think there's more?" Kaelin asked. "Beatrice said she was working off a debt." Silas narrowed his eyes. "Ivy's parents died protecting this pack. The pack pays for the funeral. The pack pays for the ward. There is no debt. Someone has been lying to her." "I'll get the files," Kaelin said. Silas nodded and turned back to the stairs. The rage was still there, burning hot. But now it was focused. He had a war to fight, but first he had a girl to save. The fire in the Alpha's bedroom had burned down to glowing embers. Silas opened the door quietly, afraid of waking her. But Ivy wasn't asleep. She was out of the bed. Silas stopped in the doorway, his heart twisting. Ivy was on her hands and knees near the fireplace. She had found a washcloth from the bathroom and was frantically scrubbing a spot of soot off the hearth. She was wearing one of his oversized t-shirts that hung to her knees, her legs trembling with weakness. "Ivy," Silas said softly. She flinched violently, dropping the cloth. She scrambled back, pressing herself against the stone wall, her eyes wide with panic. "I'm sorry I saw the soot. I didn't want you to be angry. I know I'm not supposed to be in the big bed. I'll sleep on the rug." Silas felt like he had been punched in the gut. This was what they had done to her. They had broken her spirit so thoroughly that even half-dead her first instinct was to clean, to serve, to apologize for existing. "Ivy, stop." Silas walked into the room, leaving the door open. He didn't approach her aggressively. He walked to the bed and sat on the edge. "You don't clean here. Not anymore." "But Mrs. Halloway says idle hands make—" "Mrs. Halloway is gone," Silas said firmly. "She will never give you an order again." Ivy stared at him, trying to process this. "Gone?" "She's in the dungeon," Silas said, "where she belongs." He patted the mattress beside him. "Come here, please, the floor is cold." Ivy hesitated. Every instinct she had screamed, run. Alphas were dangerous. They took what they wanted. But the pull, the bond, it was singing in her blood. Being near him felt like standing in the sun after a lifetime of winter. She crawled slowly toward the bed. She didn't sit next to him. She sat at the foot of the bed, keeping distance. "May I look at your hands?" Silas asked. Ivy extended her hands. They were still raw, but the salve Dr. Aris had applied was working. Silas took them in his thumbs grazing the old scars on her wrists. "Who tied you up, Ivy?" She pulled her hands back slightly. "It was for the silverware, when I dropped a fork last year. Mrs. Halloway said I had unsteady hands. She tied them to the chair so I would learn to be still." Silas grit his teeth so hard his jaw ached. "And the burn on your shoulder, ironing," she whispered. "I was too slow." Silas took a deep breath, forcing his pheromones to stay calm, smelling of cedar and rain, trying to soothe her. "You said you were working off a debt. Beatrice mentioned it." "My parents?" Ivy looked down, ashamed. They died owing the pack money for their training. Mrs. Halloway said the cost of raising me was high. I had to work it off. I've paid off, maybe half." There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Silas called. Kalen entered, carrying a thick leather-bound folder. He looked furious. His usually stoic beta expression was replaced by a grimace of disgust. "Alpha," Kalen said, ignoring Ivy's flinch. "You need to see this." Silas took the folder. He opened it. It was Ivy's file. He scanned the first page. Parents Marcus and Sarah O'Connell. Deceased border skirmish, 2014. Status heroes of the pack. "Heroes," Silas read aloud. "They died saving the pup who would become the current Gamma." He flipped the page to the financial records. Stipend Orphan Fund Allocation, number 404. Monthly allowance for care of Ivy O'Connell, $2,500. Silas's eyes narrowed. "There's a stipend. The pack has been paying for her care for 18 years. He flipped to the withdrawal logs. Authorized withdrawal, Mrs. E. Halloway. Cosine Delta Orion Vane. Silas slammed the book shut. The sound was like a gunshot. "They stole it," Silas whispered, the realization making him sick. They didn't just enslave her. They stole the money meant to feed her. He looked at Ivy. She was watching him with confusion. She didn't understand. "Ivy," Silas said, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "Your parents didn't owe a debt. They were heroes. The pack pays for the children of fallen warriors. We have been paying for your clothes, your food, and your education every month for 18 years. Ivy's mouth opened slightly. But I never went to school. I wear uniforms. I eat leftovers." "I know," Silas said, reaching out to cup her face. This time she didn't flinch. She was too stunned. "Halloway and Vane stole it. All of it. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. They told you you were a slave so you wouldn't ask questions, and they pocketed the money." Tears welled in Ivy's green eyes. I wasn't supposed to be a maid." "No," Silas said fiercely. "You were supposed to be a cherished daughter of this pack. You were supposed to be free." The unfairness of it hit Ivy all at once. The nights she spent crying from hunger, the cold, the beatings, all for a lie, all for money. She started to cry. Not the silent, scared weeping of a servant, but the loud, gasping sobs of a broken heart. Silas pulled her into his chest. He wrapped his massive arms around her, burying his face in her neck. "Let it out," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. I promise you, Ivy, I am going to make them pay. I will take every cent they stole and I will take a pound of flesh for every tear you cried." "It hurts," she sobbed, clutching his shirt. "It hurts so much." "I know." Silas rocked her. "I know." Over Ivy's shoulder, Silas looked at Kaelin. "Kaelin," Silas said, his eyes cold as death. "Go to the cells. Bring Holloway to the interrogation room." "And Vane?" Kaelin asked. "Send a squad to his estate. Freeze his assets. Seize his property. If he tries to run, take his legs." Silas looked down at the girl weeping in his arms. The girl who should have been a princess of the pack, but had been treated like a prisoner. "Tonight," Silas vowed, "the cleaning ends. Tonight, the bloodletting begins." As Ivy cried herself into exhaustion, the bond between them solidified. It wasn't built on romance, yet it was built on a foundation of shared grief and a promise of vengeance. The Alpha had found his mate, but she was broken, and Silas Blackwood was going to burn the world down to find the pieces to put her back together. The dungeons of Blackwood Manor were not like the ones in fairy tales. They were modern, sterile, and terrifyingly soundproof. Silas walked down the concrete corridor, the heavy thud of his boots echoing like a death knell. But he wasn't alone. Beside him, wrapped in a thick cashmere coat that cost more than the Vane estate, walked Ivy. She was still pale, her movements slightly stiff from the lingering cold in her bones, but her head was up. She had insisted on coming. "Are you sure?" Silas asked, pausing at the heavy steel door of Interrogation Room 1. He placed a hand on the small of her back, his touch grounding her. "You don't have to see them. I can handle this. I want to handle this." Ivy looked at the steel door. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but the fear was different now. It wasn't the fear of a victim. It was the fear of a survivor facing her ghosts. "I need to," Ivy whispered. "If I don't face her now, I'll be afraid of the dark for the rest of my life. I'm done being afraid, Silas." Silas looked at her with a mixture of awe and savage pride. "Then let's go." He swiped his keycard. The door hissed open. Instantly stripped of their finery and handcuffed to a metal table sat Mrs. Holloway and Orion Vane. Holloway looked small without her uniform. Her hair was messy, her face stripped of makeup, revealing the cruelty etched into her wrinkles. Orion looked worse. His nose was broken from Silas's earlier correction, and his suit was torn. When they saw Silas, they stiffened. When they saw Ivy, their expressions shifted to pure loathing. "So," Holloway sneered, though her voice shook. "The stray dog returns with her master." Silas moved so fast the air cracked. He slammed his hands onto the metal table, leaning into Holloway's face. "One more word," Silas whispered, his canines lengthening, "and I will rip your throat out with my teeth. You are not speaking to a maid. You are speaking to your Luna." Holloway flinched back, the smell of alpha aggression overwhelming her senses. Ivy stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She walked to the other side of the table and looked down at the woman who had made her life a living hell for 18 years. "Why?" Ivy asked simply. "Because I could." Holloway spat, her bitterness overriding her survival instinct. "Your mother was arrogant. She thought she was better than me because she was a warrior. When she died and you were left, it was easy. Who cares about an orphan?" "The pack cares," Silas growled. "Orion, explain the ledger." Orion Vane was sweating profusely. It was a misunderstanding, Alpha, an administrative error. We were holding the funds in trust." "You bought a vacation home in the Alps last month," Silas interrupted, tossing a file onto the table. You bought Beatrice a new Porsche. You paid off your gambling debts, all with money meant for Ivy's food, for her clothes. Silas circled the table, prowling like a tiger. I have already seized your assets, Orion. The council has reviewed the evidence. You are destitute. Your house belongs to the pack. Your cars belong to the pack. Your accounts are frozen. Orion began to weep. Silas, please. We are family. My daughter. Beatrice is being escorted to the border as we speak, Silas said coldly. She is lucky I didn't let Ivy choose her punishment. Ivy looked at Halloway's hands. They were trembling. The older woman was terrified. You told me I was worthless. Ivy said, her voice gaining strength. You told me my parents died in disgrace. You made me sleep in the cellar. You beat me for spilling water. I made you tough, Halloway hissed. No. Ivy shook her head. You made me sad. But he... She looked at Silas. He made me strong. Ivy turned to Silas. I don't want them in the cells. It costs money to feed prisoners, and that money should go to the orphans. Silas raised an eyebrow, impressed. Then what is your judgment, Luna? Ivy looked at the two of them. She remembered the cold. She remembered the feeling of the snow burying her alive while the music played inside. The northern wastes, Ivy said. Orion gasped. No, that's a death sentence. It's rogue territory. There's nothing there but ice and rocks. It's cold, Ivy said softly, just like the loading dock. She leaned in her green eyes, hard as emeralds. You locked me out in the blizzard without a coat, Mrs. Halloway. You said the cold would teach me grace. So I'm giving you the same lesson. Silas nodded, a dark smile playing on his lips. Kalen. The beta stepped in from the shadows. Drive them to the northern border, Silas commanded. Strip them of their pack marks. Give them nothing but the clothes on their backs. If they survive the winter, they can live as rogues. If they don't, Silas shrugged, then nature has taken its course. You can't do this, Halloway shrieked, as Kalen and two guards dragged them up. I raised you, Silas. I served this house. You served yourself, Silas said, turning his back on them. As the door closed on their screams, the room fell silent. Ivy stood there, trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted. She felt Silas's arms wrap around her from behind, pulling her flush against his chest. It's done, he murmured into her hair. They can never hurt you again. Ivy turned in his arms, burying her face in his shirt, inhaling the scent of vanilla and rain. Is it wrong that I don't feel sorry for them? No. Silas kissed her forehead. It's justice. And now we have a feast to finish, 3 months later. The snow had melted, replaced by the vibrant green of spring. The Blackwood estate had changed. The atmosphere was lighter. The staff, no longer terrorized by Halloway, worked with smiles. The windows were open, letting in the fresh mountain air. Tonight was the spring equinox ball. But everyone knew what it really was. It was the lunar ceremony. Upstairs in the master suite, Ivy stared at herself in the floor-length mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The hollow cheeks were gone, filled out by months of proper meals and rest. The bruises were distant memories. Her skin glowed with health. She was wearing a gown of deep emerald green velvet that matched her eyes. It was off the shoulder, revealing the smooth skin where the burn marks used to be healed completely by Silas's daily attention and the best shifter healers money could buy. You look, a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Like a queen. Ivy turned. Silas stood there, leaning against the frame. He was wearing a tuxedo, but he had forgone the tie, his top button undone. He looked relaxed, happy. The constant tension that used to define his features had vanished. "I'm nervous," Ivy admitted, smoothing the velvet skirt. "Everyone will be looking. They remember me as the maid who dropped the tray." Silas walked over to her. He didn't rush. He moved with the confident swagger of a man who owned the world and knew exactly where his treasure was buried. He stood behind her, looking at their reflection in the mirror. He was dark and dangerous. She was light and resilient. "Let them look," Silas said, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Let them see what they missed. Let them see what I found." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a rare, uncut emerald set in black gold. "This," Silas said, sliding it onto her finger, "belonged to my grandmother. She was the strongest Luna this pack ever saw. Until now." Ivy looked at the ring, tears pricking her eyes. "Silas, I don't know how to be a Luna. I don't know politics. I don't know how to lead." Silas turned her around, lifting her chin with his finger. "Being a Luna isn't about politics, Ivy. It's about heart. You survived 18 years of hell, and you still have the kindest heart I've ever known. You forgave the staff who ignored you. You set up a fund for the orphans with the money we recovered from Vane. You are already leading them." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "And besides," he whispered, a smirk touching his lips, "if anyone gives you trouble, I'll just eat them." Ivy laughed. It was a clear bell-like sound that made Silas's wolf purr. "You can't just eat the dignitaries, Silas. Watch me." He offered her his arm. "Ready?" Ivy took a deep breath. She looked at the ring on her finger. She looked at the man who had burned the world down to save her. "Ready?" They walked out of the room, down the long hallway, to the top of the grand staircase. Below them, the ballroom was packed. Hundreds of wolves from allied packs, the council, the staff. As Silas and Ivy appeared at the top of the stairs, the music stopped. The silence this time wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Silas didn't introduce her. He didn't make a speech about politics or alliances. He simply took her hand, raised it to his lips, and kissed her knuckles in front of everyone. Then he released his scent, not a threat, but a claim. A wave of power that washed over the room, carrying the distinct intertwined scent of alpha and mate. "My pack," Silas said, his voice carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. He looked at Ivy, his eyes glowing gold with adoration. "Meet your Luna." The room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. Cheers, howls, and stomping feet. The staff, the ones who had worked beside her in the scullery, were cheering the loudest, some of them crying. Ivy squeezed Silas's hand. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't the stain on the floor. She was Ivy Blackwood. And for the first time in her life, she was home. As the music started a slow, sweeping waltz, Silas pulled her into his arms. "I told you," he whispered, as they began to dance, spinning in the center of the room that had once been her prison. "I told you I'd get you." Ivy looked up at him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "And I told you," she smiled, leaning up to kiss him, "that I'm never leaving." Outside, the winter snow had melted, but inside the fire was just beginning to burn. And that is the story of Silas and Ivy. From the freezing snow of a loading dock to the throne of the Blackwood Pack. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who are treated like nothing are the ones who have the strength to be everything. Now, I have a question for you guys. If you were Silas, would you have banished Mrs. Halloway and Orion to the frozen wastes? Or would you have done something even worse? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you never miss a daily romance drama. I'll see you in the next video.